are we? Welcome to episode 9 in my series of videos on zonal marketing, a brand new model which uses the tactical lessons taken from football management to help you to understand, plan and measure your marketing activity effectively. I'm Simon Vincent, the marketing tactician, and in this episode, the first of 4 videos that focus on marketing tactics, I'm going to be exploring how to sell a high consideration product. Remember that tactics help you to discover what your target customer's resistance is to either 1, buying from you, or 2, becoming a part of your tribe. In the case of high consideration products, that resistance usually arises because of the high cost of the product. And by cost, we're talking in relative terms. So, for example, BMWs are expensive, but actually so are Skodas. The high consideration element really comes in when you start comparing the two. So given that both fundamentally do the same thing, is the BMW really worth paying that much extra for? But the same is true for a relatively inexpensive product like, for example, coffee. The old-fashioned greasy spoon cafe is selling you fundamentally the same product as Starbucks, but when Howard Schultz decided in the 1980s that he wanted to charge you 3 or 4 times as much for pretty much the same thing, he had to strike upon a marketing mix that would allow him to overcome people's resistance to spending so much on a coffee. In other words, companies that will be interested in using this approach don't have a problem with customers knowing that their product exists, coffee, cars, etc. For these businesses, customers know that their brand exists too, BMW, Starbucks. So, in footballing terms, you have possession of the ball, remembering that in zonal marketing, possession equals your target customer's attention. But the types of businesses that will be interested in this approach are the ones where their customers stop themselves from buying from them because of the perceived high cost of their product, i.e., these businesses can't score goals because their customers need the space to make up their mind. Before we go any further with the marketing, let's take a look into the world of football to get a steer on the best course of action. Pep Guardiola's 2009 Barcelona team won an historic treble, but it didn't come easy. In that season's Champions League semi-final against Chelsea, Guardiola's side found themselves needing a single away goal to go through. For long periods, they controlled the possession, but as the BBC's match report put it, they refused to stray from their trademark passing approach, a not-so-veiled criticism of the tiki-taka style that Barcelona had become so closely associated with. Tiki-taka prizes possession above all else and seeks to keep control of the ball through playing short, high-percentage passes. This was a team that had gifted technicians such as Lionel Messi, Xavi Hernandez and Andres Iniesta, and yet Guardiola instructed them to do nothing more complicated than to play short passes between them. The thinking was that expansive, long passes brought with them the risk that possession could be lost, and that was not acceptable in Guardiola's system. The problem with the tactical approach was that, as Chelsea had worked out in that game, tiki-taka necessarily meant keeping a very narrow shape, and a narrow shape meant that the opposition could defend the middle of the field, making it difficult for Barcelona to score. Guardiola's response was to tell his wide forwards to hug the touchline. Why? As Thierry Henry has explained, that position allowed Iniesta to get the ball in central midfield because Henry was occupying the right back. In other words, because Henry's job was to create space in the final third, it allowed the midfielders to be more effective in their possession-retaining role in the middle of the field. A similar pattern had been in evidence earlier that week in 2009 when Guardiola famously dragged Messi into his office late at night on the eve of a match against Real Madrid. His instruction had been that Messi should play in a deep false 9 position. Again, the idea was to drag opposition defenders out of their usual areas, creating space for the midfield to move into. So, taking all that we know about how we've set up a formation in zonal marketing, what lessons can we take from this Barcelona's side to learn how to engage our customers? The focus of Guardiola's system was dominating possession, particularly through Xavi and Iniesta in the middle of the park. In zonal marketing, this area of the field is covered by our broadcast channels. So specifically, Xavi and Iniesta would be occupying the zones attributed to the customer demanded and or niche interest communication. In these zones, we're primarily looking at channels such as Google and social media marketing in the online space. Offline variations might include a very targeted mail shot to specific houses or businesses within a small radius of your company's premises. Looking at the sort of approach we take on those channels, we want to be focusing on possession retaining, i.e. lifestyle content. Short, simple messages that show me how my life will be made better or easier through interacting with your product. The aim is not to deliver a knockout blow with any of these pieces of content, but to simply nudge the audience a step closer to buying with each interaction. In marketing, we have what's called the rule of 7, as championed by the likes of Neil Patel. In essence, your audience has to see a brand message 7 times before they'll be ready to buy. In actual fact, that number can go up massively depending on the level of consideration required. So one Think with Google study into the car leasing consideration phase found that the average customer has 900 plus digital interactions before buying a car. And that's just split across just the channels of Google searches, YouTube videos, images, accessed through Google of course, and then dealer and manufacturer interactions via their websites. Another popular variation on the rule of 7 is Gary Vaynerchuk's jab, 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 right hook approach, which essentially reinforces the idea mentioned above of drip, drip, dripping small relationship building information to your customers before asking them to buy from you. But rather than adapting the boxing analogy, because I'm a lover, not a fighter, I think of it as being more like a passing the ball around the midfield before finding that killer pass through to Messi to run in and slide it past the goalkeeper. So that explains what we do with our broadcast channels. But what about those forwards? In Guardiola's setup, each of the forwards were tasked with creating space in slightly different ways. So you had Henry and Samuel Eto'o keeping wide, whilst Lionel Messi dropped deep. In zonal marketing, the equivalent would be to apply a space creating, i.e. audience-focused approach in your transaction points. Furthermore, to go mass market with some of your channels if and when you can. I previously mentioned Starbucks as a great example of this. In contrast to the greasy spoon cafes that preceded them, spaces where you'd drink your 50p cup of lukewarm coffee on an uncomfortable plastic chair before hurrying off as soon as possible, Schultz famously wanted his Starbucks restaurants to be the so-called third place between the office and home. As such, he created warm, comfortable environments, played jazz on the stereos, allowed customers to use his Wi-Fi and stay for as long as they wanted while drinking their expensive coffees. He even instructed his staff to always ask for their customer's name so that they could write it on their cup. This audience-centered approach made customers feel like they were in a non-transactional space, even though every high street shop is fundamentally set up to take customers' money from them. But Starbucks cafes don't feel like that. They feel like a place you can go to and not feel like you're being sold to, where you can sit and read a book or work without feeling like you're impacting that cafe's profitability. Lionel Messi playing deep. In doing so, Starbucks essentially single-handedly created coffee culture and managed to get us all to spend £3 or £4 on a coffee without thinking twice. The final piece of the jigsaw, of course, is to go mass market in their targeting, having as many chains as possible, which of course benefits the rest of the marketing system because it keeps you top of mind, i.e. in possession, much like Henry on the left wing helped Iniesta in midfield. Nowadays, Starbucks brand awareness is so high, thanks to their mass market targeting, and their customer loyalty so good, thanks to their space-creating in-store approach, that, according to Google Keyword Planner, the most popular key phrase attached to the word Starbucks is Starbucks near me, with up to 1 million searches in the UK alone per month. Searchers will then inevitably see a Google My Business, a customer-demanded a broadcast channel result, with their nearest Starbucks cafe shown on a map along with directions on how to get there. Lifestyle content. A similar thing can be seen with car dealerships, where the high consideration brands such as BMW, Mercedes and Audi now go to great lengths to have coffee machines, TVs and magazines in their dealerships to make you feel at home. I won't go into this too much here because it's essentially the same tiki-taka model that Starbucks follow, but it is worth noting, as I'll refer back to it when I talk about Tesla in the next video on counter-attacking marketing. Just one final note, just to reiterate something that I said in my last video. You do not need to have 11 marketing channels to apply the principles of zonal marketing. For that reason, I haven't gone into every single player and what they all did in that 2009 Barcelona team. The important takeaways from this episode and tactical approach are: number one, companies should take a possession retaining approach to their broadcast channels, no matter how many of them they have, i.e. they should communicate using lifestyle content that links me to the company's product in some way. The more pieces of this content you can put out, the more omnipresent you can be, the better. Keep yourself top of mind with high amounts of low uplift content posting regularly. The second takeaway is that companies should take a space creating approach to their conversion channels, i.e. these channels should feel like they are built around the customer rather than being built around the company. And that is how to market a high consideration product as informed by the tiki-taka tactics of Pep Guardiola. Okay, I think that's enough for now. Check back here for a new video each week, each one explaining another part of the marketing process through a footballing lens. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please do like and comment, and while you're at it, why not tell your mates to tell their mates? After all, we all have a duty to share these things we know, so that we may improve the lives of others. I am available for speaking gigs, training sessions and client work, and if you'd like to talk to me about any of that, you can do so by visiting x-cmo.com. In the next session, I'll be talking about the second of the four main marketing tactical approaches, counter-attacking. I'll be explaining what it is, what kinds of companies use it, and solve what kind of problem, and how you can organize your channels, targeting and content to get the most out of that approach. Until then, thank you for joining me for this episode of Zonal Marketing, and I'll see you next time.